To be born is to be burdened with wanting. The cry of the infant is not innocence, but revolt, a sound against the law of existence itself. Before language, there is pain. Before meaning, there is the refusal of the body to be what it has become. The world greets this cry with lullabies, but no melody can disguise the truth, that life begins in protest, and every heartbeat since is an echo of that protest, stretched through years of futile desire. The first taste of air is also the first taste of loss. To live is to be torn away from nothingness, from silence, from the peace that preceded being. What we call experience is merely the slow remembering of that first separation. Every joy conceals its own grave. The laughter of the child already trembles with the knowledge that it will one day fade. Even the brightest morning carries the shadow of dusk in its light. There is no promise within existence that time does not betray. We imagine purpose, but the will does not reason it hungers. It moves without meaning, blind as a root seeking soil. It drives the animal, the man, the god indifferent to what they destroy in their pursuit. The will creates not because creation has worth, but because it cannot stop itself. We speak of freedom, yet none are free from this hunger. Even the one who renounces the world does so to quiet the will, not to escape it. Every prayer, every ambition, every act of love, all are different names for the same unrest. The will demands to live, and life demands to suffer. In this truth, the heart grows still. What we call hope is the last mask of ignorance, the last defense against the nakedness of being. When the illusion of purpose falls away, only one thing remains: the weight of existence itself, pressing against the mind like the sea against a sunken stone. Yet in that pressure, there is clarity. The mind, stripped of its consolations, begins to see without distortion. It sees that all striving from the insect to the empire ends in the same stillness. The dance of the world is beautiful only because it is doomed. We do not suffer because the world is cruel. We suffer because we are forced to want in a world that gives nothing lasting. Desire is the wound, and time is the knife that keeps it open. No god decreed this law. It is older than gods. It is the very breath of existence. There is no enemy to defeat, no salvation to pursue. The truth is not a victory. It is the collapse of every battle. When the will sees itself, when it feels the futility of its own hunger, there is only silence. And in that silence, perhaps, the faint whisper of freedom, not from pain, but from illusion. Listen closely to that silence. It is not comfort. It is not peace. It is the world as it is, without veil or purpose. And it is enough to crush or to awaken. The choice is not yours, for even the choice belongs to the will. Desire is the axis upon which existence turns. It does not ask for permission. It does not rest. It breeds itself from absence, then devours the peace it seeks. Every being, from worm to emperor, trembles beneath its reign. To want is to ache toward a horizon that recedes with every step. What we call fulfillment is merely the pause before the next thirst. Even in contentment, the will is restless. It listens for what has not yet been taken. Happiness is nothing but the stillness between demands, the quiet before the next hunger begins to speak. The will does not love what it attains. It loves only the reaching. Once the object is grasped, the ecstasy expires. Pleasure at its height is already dying. It is the scream of the will as it burns itself out for a moment's illusion of rest. Every pleasure bears within it the seed of its negation. The feast births the famine. The lover's touch already contains the ache of departure. Even the victory is a loss in disguise, for the will now must invent a new battlefield. To live, therefore, is to chase what cannot satisfy. No creature escapes this sentence. Desire renews itself like a wound that heals only to reopen. Each cure is a new disease. Each attainment another link in the chain of becoming. The mind, proud of its reason, calls this pursuit purpose. It mistakes servitude for freedom. It names its cage destiny and calls its exhaustion meaning. Yet beneath all philosophy, all faith, all art, there is only the trembling of the will, disguised in words. We build temples to our desires and call them civilizations. We sculpt ideals to justify our cravings. But the foundation of all achievement is the same emptiness that drives a moth toward the flame, the blind yearning to dissolve into something, anything, other than itself. The will does not wish to live. It wishes to cease its own torment through motion. It imagines satisfaction as extinction, but it cannot die. Thus, it invents eternity not as salvation, but as the promise that it may continue wanting forever. This is the cruelty of the world, not that it denies desire, but that it keeps feeding it. The fruit never stops ripening, and so the hunger never stops returning. In every fulfilled wish, the will feels only its own continuation. The circle closes, the wheel turns, the torment resumes, and within this circle sits the self, the proud prisoner. It believes itself the master of its desires, yet it is only their reflection. The ego is a theater where the will performs its endless play of need. Every identity, every dream, every conviction rolls written by the same unseen hand. What we call I is merely the mask the will wears to watch its own suffering. It suffers, it desires, it fears extinction, yet it is itself the architect of all three. The self believes it is striving toward fulfillment, but in truth it strives only to sustain the will's illusion of motion. Time is the stage upon which this illusion unfolds. It gives shape to the torment, turning chaos into sequence, agony into story. The past becomes longing, the future becomes promise, and the present, that fleeting instant of now, becomes the scaffold where both crucify the mind. In time, everything perishes, but nothing ends. Every death renews the will through another birth, another hunger. The body decays, the thought fades, but the essence that demands to exist endures blind, trembling, eternal. Thus, pain is not the exception. It is the texture of being. Pleasure is the brief suspension of the inevitable. Suffering is not punishment. It is the pulse of life itself. To suffer is simply to feel the will in motion, the raw sound of existence grinding against itself. Yet, within this recognition, there is a strange relief. For the first time, the soul sees that its torment was never personal. The pain belongs to the structure of the world, not to the story of the individual. No one is to blame, not man, not God, not fate. The ache in the heart, the despair in the mind, the restlessness that corrodes every joy, these are not errors. They are the natural laws of being conscious in a world that cannot fulfill itself. Once this is seen, the noise of guilt begins to fade. Suffering loses its shame and becomes what it has always been, the vibration of the will endlessly echoing through form. To understand this is not to escape it. Understanding offers no cure, only lucidity. But in lucidity, the will begins to weaken not by force, but by recognition. It trembles under the weight of its own reflection. The more clearly one sees, the less one desires to grasp. The will begins to hesitate, like a storm aware of its own futility. It still rages, but without conviction. In this trembling, the first taste of stillness appears not peace, but the exhaustion that precedes it. This stillness is the beginning of wisdom. It is not born from hope, but from the slow collapse of craving. It is the moment the self ceases to protest what it cannot change. It does not say, I will endure, but I no longer resist. And when resistance fades, the will pauses. In that pause, time loosens its grip. The mind watches without demand. The world moves without purpose. And for one silent instant, the torment forgets itself. That instant is not salvation. It is clarity, the faint light that appears when illusion finally burns out. The soul sees the machinery of its own suffering and, in seeing it, no longer fully belongs to it. The longer one lives, the more clearly one sees that desire does not lead outward, but inward into narrower circles of repetition. The world appears vast only to the eyes of those who still hope to escape their own reflection. But every horizon returns the same image, the self disguised, transposed, yet always identical. A man builds a life, a city, a monument, and calls it progress. But progress is merely the will's attempt to escape boredom, its own mirror made visible. When nothing is left to conquer, the will turns against itself. It begins to devour what it has created, like fire consuming its own ash. Thus, civilization is not a triumph, but an extension of the same torment. The restless mind externalizes its hunger, fashions it into systems, empires, economies, art, each another form of craving carved into matter. We call this history, yet it is only desire petrified in time. Every philosophy, every creed, every revolution arises from the same impulse, the refusal to accept what is. The thinker believes he seeks truth, but he seeks only a shape of thought that will make existence bearable. The lover seeks the beloved not for the beloved's sake, but to quiet the noise within. The saint renounces the world, yet in his renunciation he affirms it, for even to reject is to acknowledge. This is the cruel circle of will resistance is still participation. To fight desire is to feed it. To flee the world is to drag it within oneself. Even detachment is claimed by the will as its victory. Only when one no longer seeks to win does the circle begin to crack. The will, deprived of justification, trembles. In the silence of that trembling, the illusion of control fates the self, sees that it never acted, only reacted, moved by forces older than thought. We are born as vessels through which the will flows. We call it life, but it is motion without meaning, the wind stirring dust. The tragedy of man is that he becomes conscious of this motion. The animal suffers, but does not reflect upon its suffering. Man suffers twice in pain and in the knowledge of pain. Thus, consciousness is not a gift, but an amplification of torment. It allows the will to perceive itself, yet not to free itself. The mind becomes a mirror where the agony of existence contemplates its own form. The wiser one grows, the more piercing the reflection becomes. To live long enough is to lose faith in beginnings. The world repeats itself with unbearable precision faces, passions, betrayals, victories, all variations of the same hunger. Time disguises the sameness of things, but beneath its current lies monotony. Every century rehearses the same despair with new costumes. The modern man thinks himself evolved, but he kneels before the same gods, only their names have changed. He calls his idols success, relevance, happiness. He builds shrines of glass and electricity, where he worships his own image. But his prayers are the same, to be spared from meaninglessness, to be told that his suffering serves a purpose. The market, the media, the empire, all whisper the same promise. You can be more. But this is the cruelest illusion of all. For to want to be more is to confess that one is not enough. And to never be enough is the eternal condition of the will. Thus, the machinery of modern life is the machinery of metaphysical despair. Every advertisement is a sermon of inadequacy. Every ambition a hymn to the will's insatiability. We no longer believe in God, but we still kneel before desire. The ancient man prayed for salvation. The modern man scrolls for it. The gesture has changed, not the essence. Both seek distraction from the stillness that reveals the truth. There is nothing to be gained. To exist is to lose endlessly until nothing remains to be taken. The self, that trembling fiction, clings to its narrative. It needs to believe it moves toward something. Without purpose, it fears dissolution. So it weaves its little stories, each a defense against the void. Career, family, nation, love, legacy. Each a fragile wall erected against the wind of nothingness. But time dismantles them one by one. Love decays into memory. Ambition ends in fatigue. Fame evaporates into indifference. Even the most beautiful face collapses into dust. And what remains beneath? The same silent witness that was there at birth, untouched, unfulfilled, unredeemed. The more one chases permanence, the more obvious its absence becomes. For permanence is not hidden, it is impossible. To seek it is to suffer eternally. To stop seeking it is to step outside the circle, if only for a moment. But to stop seeking is not to cease living. It is to live without illusion, to move through the world as through a dream one no longer mistakes for waking. One still acts, but the fever is gone. Desire becomes observation. Pain becomes perception. The self becomes transparent to itself. In that transparency, a faint form of peace begins to take shape. Not the peace of fulfillment, but the peace of comprehension. The will still moves, but its power to deceive diminishes. The soul begins to watch its own hunger with detached tenderness, as one might watch a storm pass without believing it personal. This is the first threshold of release, the beginning of seeing through the illusions that bind the world. And when the gaze lifts outward again, the eyes fall upon civilization, the vast stage upon which the will performs its grandest masquerade. Its lights are blinding, its noise unending, its actors convinced of their importance. Yet beneath every costume, the same trembling emptiness waits to be named. The world calls itself alive, but it is only busy. Busyness is the mask of fear, the terror of meeting oneself in silence. Society celebrates motion because stillness would reveal the void beneath its choreography. Every human institution, from the marketplace to the cathedral, exists to distract from the unbearable question, why? But there is no why. There is only is. The will does not justify, it perpetuates. Life continues because it must, not because it should. And the mind, forever seeking meaning, stands bewildered before this mute persistence. So humanity invents beauty, morality, purpose, not to understand, but to endure. We build towers of reason to escape the madness of awareness. We speak of love, justice, and progress, each a fragile scaffolding built over the abyss. But beneath it, the same truth hums. The world is will made visible, and the will is suffering made flesh. Even love, that most celebrated illusion, is the will's cruelest trick. It promises unity, but delivers dependence. It offers eternity, but ensures repetition. The beloved is not loved for themselves, but for the image of peace they momentarily suggest. The lover hungers for the end of longing and finds only another form of it. So the world turns. Nations rise and fall. Empires proclaim progress, then vanish into ruins. Generations dream and decay. And through it all, the same invisible current flows the will, unbroken, blind, undying. In the quiet beyond history, a truth glimmers. The world does not need to change, only to be seen as it is. To see it thus is to begin to loosen its grip. For illusion binds more tightly than pain. It keeps the will believing it can still be satisfied. When illusion dies, what remains is neither despair nor joy. It is something quieter, a kind of still seeing, as though the eye of eternity has opened within the mortal frame. The world continues its noise, but the observer no longer belongs to it. He watches without wanting. He acts without aim. He lives, but the fever of living has gone out of him. And thus the descent merges with the outer world, and the anatomy of suffering becomes visible not only in the soul, but in the civilization that mirrors it. We now enter that reflection fully the theater of deception, where mankind builds meaning to conceal the silence of being. The world is a mirror turned outward. What you call society is the will multiplied, externalized, reflected in stone and noise. Each man believes himself free, yet all move in the same rhythm, driven by the same blind hunger, clothed in different forms. Civilization is the will's grandest disguise. It clothes necessity in glory. It calls its servitude progress. The cities glitter, but they glitter like the surface of a wound, bright, restless, never healed. Man builds not from wisdom, but from dread. The monuments, the machines, the arts, all rise from the fear of silence. To cease creating would be to face the emptiness that creation conceals. So he works, he invents, he speaks, lest stillness reveal his futility. In his industry, he imagines mastery. He believes he has tamed the world, but it is only his torment that has changed form. He feeds it electricity, adorns it with metal, connects it with invisible wires, and still it cries from within him. The progress he worships is merely the will learning new languages of unrest. Even knowledge becomes an escape. The scholar, the scientist, the philosopher, each digs into the same abyss, hoping discovery will undo the burden of existing. But the more one knows, the clearer it becomes. Understanding does not redeem. It only sharpens the outline of futility. Art too serves the will. The painter seeks beauty, the musician harmony, the poet meaning each attempting to shape suffering into form. Their creations tremble with a strange duality. They console, yet they remind. Every masterpiece is a wound shown beautifully. Art reveals the pain it cannot heal. Religion offers another mask. It gives suffering a purpose and calls it salvation. It transforms helplessness into devotion and despair into worship. But beneath the hymn, the same cry remains. Do not let this be in vain. The gods were born not from reverence, but from fear, the fear that pain might be meaningless. And yet, even in disbelief, man continues to pray. He prays to money, to success, to love, to himself. He cannot stop asking, for the asking is the will speaking through him. To demand meaning is to admit one's servitude to longing. Love, the most praised of all illusions, is the will's most tender cruelty. It presents itself as union, yet its root is the continuation of the species, the will ensuring its own eternity through longing. The lover feels possessed by something divine, but it is only the will using him for its quiet arithmetic of birth and decay. Even when the body is forgotten, when the love becomes memory or poetry, the chain remains. The lover desires to merge, to dissolve, to lose the separation that consciousness imposes, yet every embrace reminds him of his solitude. For no two beings can share the same center, each is locked within its own will. Thus, love both promises and denies. It offers the illusion of escape, but delivers the reminder of isolation. The greatest tenderness is always shadowed by the certainty of loss. What begins in ecstasy ends in distance, and the will smiles through the tears it created. So the world spins, filled with lovers and thinkers, workers and saints, each performing the same gesture of denial. They fill the hours with purpose, adorn the void with color, name their compulsions virtues. But beneath all effort, one truth endures. The world exists only to express the will's unrest. The noise of civilization is the voice of that unrest. Every city hums with the same nervous prayer, "Keep me from silence." Silence would expose the futility of motion, the absurdity of striving. So the streets remain bright, the machines eternal, the chatter endless. Yet every empire decays, the towers sink into dust, the machines rust, the words lose meaning. The world forgets its promises, as it always has. And still, the will begins again new faces, new forms, the same longing wearing new skin. In this endless repetition, there is both horror and a strange order. The will is not moral, not cruel, only indifferent. It does not seek our ruin nor our joy. It seeks nothing, it simply moves. And the world, this theater of appearances, is its motion made visible. When one begins to see this not in theory, but in perception, the world loses its spell. The crowds appear like waves repeating themselves, the buildings like frozen screams. Even beauty becomes transparent, and in its transparency, tragic. For beauty, too, is fleeting the will's last attempt to hide its own face. But this seeing is not despair. It is the beginning of release. For when illusion breaks, compulsion weakens. The will may still pulse, but the mind no longer obeys without awareness. The one who sees through the world continues to live within it, but differently. He does not expect fulfillment, and therefore is not endlessly betrayed. He speaks, but his words carry the weight of silence. He moves, but without direction, his life flows like a river that no longer believes in the sea. And though he remains among men, something in him has stepped outside their dream. He sees their laughter, their plans, their faiths, and feels compassion, not contempt, for he knows they are caught in the same machinery he once mistook for freedom. He no longer seeks to awaken them. The will must discover its own exhaustion. Thus, the illusion of the world begins to fade not in catastrophe, but in slow transparency. The glitter of things softens, their meaning thins. What once seemed solid becomes shadow. What once promised joy now merely points back to stillness. And when the eyes tire of surfaces, they turn inward again, not toward the self, for the self too is illusion, but toward that nameless awareness which neither strives nor speaks. It watches the world unfold, neither accepting nor rejecting it. It is not at peace, but it no longer suffers from unrest. When illusion begins to dissolve, the world does not change, only its light alters. The same faces move through their daily repetitions, but they seem carved from mist. Their gestures persist, yet behind them lies an enormous stillness, as if every motion were only the surface of a sleep that has forgotten to dream. The one who sees begins to move more quietly. He no longer debates or convinces. He listens. In listening, he hears the weariness that hides beneath every voice, the fatigue of beings compelled to continue. Even joy sounds thin, like laughter echoing in an empty room. The spectacle of culture becomes transparent. The theater, the marketplace, the festival, each appears as a ritual of distraction. Men and women exchange smiles, coins, words, each transaction an attempt to confirm that the world still holds them. But their eyes flicker with something else, the dread that perhaps nothing truly touches anything else. Progress persists, but only because to stop would be to meet the void. Machines grow more intricate, ideas more refined, pleasures more elaborate, yet the heart remains unsatisfied, the pulse of wanting unchanged. Civilization becomes an ornate postponement of despair. The will has learned to disguise boredom as ambition. Even morality, that proud structure of right and wrong, shows its scaffolding. Its laws are only the will's attempt to regulate itself, to keep its own hunger from tearing the body of the world apart. What men call virtue is merely the will restraining itself to preserve the field of its own suffering. Religion fades, but its absence is filled by new faiths. Productivity, entertainment, identity, each promises redemption through activity, yet redemption through movement is the will's oldest lie. It whispers, "You will rest when you have done enough," but enough never comes. When this is seen, the soul grows still. The noise of the world becomes a distant hum, like wind passing over ruins. The mind begins to rest in what remains when the clamor of meaning falls silent. There is no ecstasy in this rest, only a mild astonishment that existence persists even when the reasons for it have dissolved. From this quiet, compassion arises without intention. For all beings are seen as fellow prisoners of the same will, each suffering, each reaching, each deceived. Pity replaces judgment. Gentleness replaces ambition. One ceases to demand perfection from a world that was never designed to provide it. Love, stripped of its promises, becomes tenderness without possession. It no longer says, "You are mine," but rather, "You too are bound, and I see your chains." There is no triumph in this seeing, only a soft acknowledgement. Affection becomes quieter, less fevered, like a candle that knows it will soon go out, but still wishes to give light. In this way, illusion loses its grip, not through argument, but through exhaustion. The will, confronted by its own futility, begins to falter. It still murmurs its old commands: desire, achieve, become, but the voice weakens with every repetition. Even the body grows tired of striving, its movements slow, its needs simplify. The world, once so loud, becomes transparent as water. Things still appear, but they no longer claim ownership of the gaze. The mind drifts among them without preference, aware that every form is temporary, every beauty a brief condensation of the same restless matter. Nothing is rejected, yet nothing is pursued. This is not detachment learned, but detachment discovered, the quiet result of seeing too clearly. It is not coldness, it is the absence of illusion's heat. The heart still feels, but without grasping. The mind still thinks, but without demand. What remains is a slow, lucid endurance. The world continues. Children are born, lovers embrace, nations dream, stars die. The rhythm persists, but for the one who watches, it has lost its sting. Suffering remains, yet it no longer feels like punishment. It is simply the pulse of the will, ancient, indifferent, inexhaustible. In the presence of this understanding, even despair thins. Despair had required hope as its opposite. Once hope dissolves, despair cannot stand alone. What replaces both is a vast neutrality, neither cruel nor kind. It does not ask to be named. This neutrality is the beginning of the threshold, the point where the will begins to perceive its own dissolution. The next movement will dwell there, in the narrowing of the storm, the quiet before the will's silence, the strange peace that lies within surrender. When the noise of striving fades, a strange stillness remains. It does not soothe, it simply endures. The world no longer presses forward or retreats. It holds its motion like a breath withheld. Even thought seems reluctant to disturb it. Here the mind stands between two silences, the one before desire and the one beyond it. Both are without reason, yet they differ. The first is ignorance. The second is knowledge emptied of purpose. What was once sought as truth now lies bare, wordless, without promise. The collapse of meaning does not shatter the world. The mountains, the streets, the faces, they continue exactly as before. Only the gaze has changed. What once demanded explanation now simply exists, mute, complete in its incompleteness. It is in this pause that despair often arrives. For the will, still half alive, cries out for the old consolations. It demands that life means something, that its pain justify itself. But the air no longer answers. And yet, as the mind ceases to beg, a subtle relief appears thin as light through the fog. The weight of expectation lifts. The burden of why dissolves. To exist is no longer an argument, only a condition. From this quiet, beauty reappears, but changed. It no longer offers escape. It is not a promise, but a presence. The shape of a leaf, the breath of wind, the face of a stranger. Each becomes a simple manifestation, nothing more. And that nothing more becomes enough. This is the beginning of surrender, though the will still trembles. It fears extinction, even while longing for it. It whispers of new desires, new purposes, weak echoes of its former tyranny. But they fade before they form. The soul, if such a word still holds meaning, now sees itself as a ripple on an unseen sea. It moves because the sea moves. It rests because the sea stills. There is no decision, no rebellion, only the quiet rhythm of something vast passing through. In that rhythm, the idea of freedom becomes absurd. What would it mean to be free from necessity, when even freedom would require a will to pursue it? To seek liberation is to still be bound. Only the exhaustion of seeking allows the chains to fall, not because they are broken, but because they are no longer grasped. The mind begins to dwell in this exhaustion as one dwells in twilight, aware of both day and night, belonging to neither. It watches thought rise and vanish without interference. It feels emotion surge and recede without naming it joy or sorrow. It becomes the still mirror in which the world continues its motion. This state is not bliss. It is gentler than that and colder. It carries the faint taste of nothingness, which is not emptiness but the absence of demand. It is the silence that comes when the storm remembers its own futility. And in that silence, something like peace begins to breathe, not chosen, not earned, but simply present. It does not fill, it does not cure. It remains as everything else fades into it. After the collapse of striving, the will lingers like an echo. It trembles in small reflexes, a glance, a thought of hunger, a faint stirring of fear. But these movements feel distant, as though happening in another being. The observer watches them without ownership. There is a peculiar clarity in this distance. One sees the machinery of desire working by itself, without intention. The heart beats, the lungs draw air, thoughts unfold not as actions, but as continuations. Even the instinct to survive persists, but without urgency. It is as if the body and mind have remembered how to move without the fever of meaning. Eating, walking, sleeping, each becomes simple again, like the motion of water. Pleasure still visits, but softly. It comes without demand and departs without wound. Pain too remains, yet it no longer cries for explanation. The witness within does not intervene. It is not superior, not detached in pride. It simply does not belong to what it observes. It does not say I. It does not wish to cease or to continue. It exists as seeing itself. At first, this stillness can feel like absence, a hollowing. The world seems emptied of importance. One moves through days as through a faded painting. But gradually, the absence reveals itself as space. There is room now for quiet, for perception, for the simple presence of things. The will, once a storm, becomes a faint wind. It no longer drives the world. It merely passes through it. The great thirst that once defined existence diminishes, replaced by a calm incomprehension. One wonders why anything was ever pursued at all. The faces of others appear softer now. Their words, even when filled with desire or complaint, sound distant, innocent. They do not know that they are compelled. They believe, they choose. And seeing this, pity arises, not the pity that wishes to save, but the pity that simply understands. From time to time, the old will stirs again. It whispers of ambition, of longing, of pleasure remembered. Its voice is weaker, but it can still wound if believed. So the observer listens, not to obey, but to recognize the ghost as it passes. The will, unrecognized, must command. But once it is seen, its commands lose gravity. Its cries sound like wind through a hollow shell. In this seeing, one begins to discover freedom, not as choice, but as the absence of compulsion. And what follows is quiet. Days pass, seasons turn, and nothing demands to be otherwise. There is no victory here, only still endurance. The mind, once frantic for meaning, now moves like a shadow along the walls of time. It watches birth, death, decay, renewal, each the same movement wearing new faces. It feels neither horror nor joy, only recognition. The world continues to breathe, but its breath no longer enters the heart. In this space, one begins to sense what lies beyond the will. It cannot be spoken of, only suggested by the silence that grows when wanting ceases. It is not heaven, not enlightenment, not salvation. It is merely the absence of the fever to exist. There, the self thins until it becomes light. Consciousness no longer centers. It spreads, faint and continuous, like dusk after sunset. Everything that happens within it, yet it belongs to nothing. It is the calm after centuries of noise, the quiet that was always beneath the storm. What remains after desire has fallen silent is not emptiness, but an awareness without subject. It does not speak, it simply endures, still as stone under moonlight. Thought comes and goes like faint ripples on a lake that no longer remembers wind. In this stillness, the body continues, the heart continues, the world continues. But continuation no longer feels like demand, only momentum. Life moves as an echo moves after the sound has died. The will flickers once more, the last flame of habit. It offers memory as bait, small scenes of pleasure, the ghost of former joys. Yet they pass through the mind without weight, like reflections on water. There is nothing left to cling to. The hands of thought have forgotten how to grasp. Here, the self reaches its limit. It can no longer find a place to stand, no image to defend. It hovers between being and non-being, unsure which it prefers. Even fear cannot hold. It has lost its center, and slowly, without resistance, the tension that once held the world together loosens. The watcher and the watched grow indistinguishable. The distance between them collapses into a single, still field. There is no longer I see, only seeing. This is the gate of sobriety, the edge where wanting ends. To step through it is not to vanish, but to cease, insisting on existence. What follows is not death, but the quiet after every name for life has fallen away. When the will at last falls silent, the world remains. Mountains stand, rivers flow, voices drift through the air. But they are no longer seen as objects or events, only as motions within a single, vast stillness. Freedom, once imagined as conquest, now reveals itself as absence. To be free is not to choose, but to no longer need to choose. The will that once shouted "I want" has become a whisper without sound. The body still breathes, yet each breath feels borrowed from a place beyond self. Desire, ambition, fear, these rise faintly and disappear. They are seen as remnants of an old language, no longer spoken. Even pleasure, when it visits, is only a brief color across the mind. It leaves no mark. Pain comes too, but without argument. Suffering remains part of the fabric, not an error in it. The mind, unburdened of hope, grows clear. It watches thought itself fade, like mist above water. What once called itself I, now seems a sound uttered by no one. To look inward is to find only openness. There is no ecstasy here, no triumph, only a gentle gravity drawing everything toward quiet. The heart moves, then rests. The world turns, then forgets. What endures is perception without preference. If there is beauty, it is this, that everything is allowed to be exactly as it is. Joy does not need to overcome sorrow. Light does not need to banish dark. Each exists because the other does. Each completes what the other lacks. In their balance, the will has no place to hide. The eyes that once sought meaning now see only form. A leaf trembling, a face asleep, rain tracing paths on stone, all equal, all sufficient. The need to explain has ended. The heart feels only the pulse of what is, and nothing beyond. From this state, compassion deepens further. One sees that even the cruel and the lost act only from blindness, from the will's ancient hunger. To condemn them would be to reawaken that hunger within oneself. So pity remains, wordless and wide as night. Time continues, but the mind is no longer its captive. Moments pass through it, like wind through grass. The past, once heavy with memory, grows transparent. The future, once dense with promise, loses its power to wound. Only the present remains, and even it feels less like a point than an open field. Here the will has ended, but life persists quiet, detached, sufficient unto itself. No higher purpose is needed, no salvation is sought. The burden of becoming has fallen away. Being alone remains, whole and indifferent. And as perception deepens, even that distinction fades. There is no longer being or non-being, presence or absence. There is only this, whatever this is silent, complete, without opposite. The final sobriety is not death, but the recognition that death was never separate from life. Every ending has always been a continuation in another form. The will's struggle for permanence is over. What remains is permanence itself, unstriving, unnamed. The voice falls silent here. It has nothing more to demand, nothing to refuse. The words withdraw, leaving only the faint trace of their passing and the stillness that was always waiting beneath them. After the silence of the will, what remains cannot be named. The world continues its slow turning, wind over earth, light through dust. No one watches, yet everything is seen. Awareness and the seen are no longer separate. The last remnants of thought pass like birds flying out of a vanishing horizon. Even the idea of peace fades, for peace was only the opposite of turmoil. What now exists is neither a quiet without edges, a sky without distance. The mind no longer asks, and because it no longer asks, all things answer at once. The stone speaks by being stone, the air by being air. Nothing needs to become something else. All that was ever sought is contained in what is. From here, the noise of the world sounds far away, like waves heard through sleep. There is no will to return to it, no wish to remain apart. The dream of separateness dissolves into its source. The sea takes back its foam. If a thought arises, it is simple, that everything which suffered was never apart from what endures. That the pain, the longing, the endless pursuit, all were the movement of one vast life, briefly divided against itself. And now, even this understanding loses its form. No conclusion follows, because there is no one left to conclude. The breath slows, the pulse quiets, the line between sound and silence vanishes. Only presence remains endless, indifferent, complete. And then even presence ceases to matter, for there is nothing outside it to bear witness. The light does not fade. It simply becomes what it always was, the still glow of existence before the first desire stirred. Nothing begins, nothing ends. All has returned to the quiet that never left.